Was it your fault? Whatever comes to mind, think about it for a second. Philosophers have been troubled for centuries about the problem of free will, and now neuroscience potentially might offer some solutions to that question. I have studied both biology and philosophy, and I've spent weeks preparing the background research for this speech. So, today we're going to go over the background of what free will is, then we're going to talk about the ways in which neuroscience and free will have merged to answer the question, neuroscience and philosophy have merged to answer the question of free will. And finally, we're going to talk about why that's important, why any of this is important. So, firstly, what am I talking about when I say free will? Free will is the ability that a person has to choose their actions. So, let's do a quick exercise. I want you to hold out both of your hands and note that there are two of them. And then I want you to pick a hand and raise it. What if I told you that that decision was not actually yours, or was not actually free? What if I told you that none of the decisions you have made in your life have been free, or have been chosen by you, consciously? Would that bother you? So, the first thing we're going to talk about is the three historical philosophical arguments about free will. James Feaser has a textbook called Philosophical Questions, in which he discusses these three views. The first is determinism, which is the argument that free will does not exist. Determinism argues that there are two arguments about free will that I'm going to discuss. So one of them is that decisions are shaped by our personal histories and experiences. The second is that our decisions are shaped by physics. So classical physical laws, which talk about objects that aren't really big or really, really small, actually behave deterministically. And therefore the argument is that if these physical laws control our bodies and they behave deterministically, then we must also behave deterministically. Indeterminism is the argument that we do have free will. And one of the biggest parts of this argument is actually intuition. So Reid is an 18th century philosopher who argued essentially that most of us believe we have free will, therefore it's most likely that we have free will. However, physics also plays a role in supporting, potentially, the argument for free will, which is indeterminism. So, while classical physics behaves deterministically, quantum physics actually behaves indeterministically. And it's possible that quantum physics actually might be more relevant to the way that our brain works, and therefore more relevant to the question of free will. The final argument is compatibilism, which accepts that we may have some aspects of free will and some aspects of our will that are not free and are predetermined. So, determinism, indeterminism, and compatibilism are the three ways that historically philosophy has answered the question of free will. Most arguments still fit into one of those categories. Science is imperative to answering many philosophical questions, but especially the question of free will. And we saw that with physics. But now we're going to take a look at some newer research done in the field of neuroscience. So let's quickly go back to our original exercise. And once again, I want you to hold out both of your hands. And once again, I want you to pick one and raise it. Could be the same one, could be different. But this time, let's talk about what actually caused that action to happen. So you raised your hand, and that was caused by a cascade of neurons that sent an electrical impulse down your arm, and up it went. However, the question that neuroscience goes a bit deeper and asks what causes that neuron or that cascade of neurons to initially fire, and how much of a role does our consciousness play? So, Libet is a neuroscientist who did some initial research that really influenced a lot of philosophers in the conversation of free will. He did a study that showed that conscious decisions are preceded by unconscious decisions in a series of tests on test subjects where they were asked to make a decision and their brain activity was recorded throughout the process of them making that decision. So if we have no control over our decisions, then we don't have free will. However, Libet doesn't fully commit to the idea that his research refuted free will entirely. There is a component of his research that has to do with something called the point of no return, which is the point at which you can no longer change the decision that you made before it turns into an action, or the decision that was unconsciously made, as his research showed. So Libet argues that there may be some space in his research that allows for the conscious mind to play a role in actually stopping actions from occurring, so stopping that unconscious decision from going all the way through. Neil is a philosopher who responded to Libet's study and said that there might be another thing to consider. Libet's study only talked about mundane and unimportant decisions. That was the only thing that he tested for. But it's possible that there are decisions that are more weighted, and that for those decisions, the conscious mind might play a larger role. For example, if I'm deciding to travel across the world to go to my brother's wedding, I might have some more investment in that decision. Another philosopher named Bernoth also responded to Libet and said and categorized which theories of free will were refuted by his research and which were not. And he argued that the arguments for free will that were dependent on actions were refuted by Libet's study. However, there are other theories of free will that are based on judgment, and those cannot be refuted by Libet's study. So those arguments say that if we can make free judgments, we have free will. Other theories of free will, another theory of free will, argues that free will only exists when we make moral decisions, and this would also not be refuted by Libet's study. So free will is important to society for a number of reasons. Let's go back to our original interactive exercise. We had two hands out, we picked a hand. This is a relatively unimportant thing to do. But what if you're making a decision between stealing money from the company that you work for or not? It seems important then to consider this a little bit further as it relates to our legal system. If is unfair to, if we can't make free decisions, then it seems unfair to punish or reward someone. And therefore we can also take this further into religion and say that it seems like a God who is all good and all-knowing, if those are the qualifications that you give God, which many philosophers do. A God that knows that humans don't have free will and still punishes them cannot be all good, and therefore we may be able to refute our idea of God. So, we went through a background on free will, we talked about some of the more recent neuroscience research that's been done and some responses by philosophers, and then we talked about why this is important to our understanding of punishment and reward. So, neuroscience has played a large role in answering the question of free will, although it has not been definitive in answering that question. It has absolutely contributed, and the conversation continues to grow and mold, and new research is being done constantly. So let's take it back to our original question. With all of this in mind, was it your fault? Thank you.